Hey guys, this video is going to go on our how to do stuff in Japan playlist, although this video should probably be called how to not do things in Japan, because it was actually a mistake. It was a mistake that I made, and I want to tell you about it because if one person out there can learn from it and not make the same mistake, then it will be worthwhile. So some of you might have seen a video recently about a fire. There was a fire in a noodle shop, and we showed the noodle shop on fire. And if you saw that video, if you haven't seen that video, have a quick look at it just to put this thing in perspective. And at the end of the video, we showed the noodle shop the next day after the fire had been put out, and it was just to show you the damage that was done. There was no narration to that video. It was just straight out just showing you a fire and how the firefighters dealt with it. And it was on we put it on our crime emergency services in Japan playlist. So I'm going to give you a lot of unnecessary detail for this, just to put it in perspective, because there's a couple of points that we've actually talked about on previous videos that are going to be illustrated in this video. So one of the points I want to start with, first of all, those of you who saw that video would have heard helicopters overhead. So the helicopters overhead were news helicopters that were filming the fire, and one of the helicopters was a fire department helicopter, but the others were news helicopters filming the fire. So the other thing, it's a small detail, but it is important. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation. That particular morning, so the fire was one day, and then the next morning, the morning after the fire, we'd actually had a pretty heavy night in our house with some sick kids, and I'd only had about 4 hours sleep, and I was tired and burnt out, and a bit stressed. We've had it. Here's the front camera. I was a bit stressed because I couldn't get a battery for my front camera. No, that wasn't it. I was a bit stressed, so I'd only had 4 hours sleep. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is that I've mentioned in previous videos that it's all very well when we're talking calmly in a situation like this, where, you know, sitting in a quiet car, having a quiet chat, you guys are sitting in front of your computers or your smartphones or whatever you're doing, calmly listening to a video. It's all very well under those circumstances to not be stressed, you know, and to listen to these how-to videos and go, yes, I could do that, and the advice to be all very wise about how to do things in Japan. But as I mentioned on previous videos, the times that you get caught out when you're in Japan, the times that you get caught out and are more likely to make mistakes are when things happen that you're not expecting, or when you're tired, or when you're hungry, or when you're not at your best. So when you know you're going into a situation where you get your head around it, okay, look, I'm going to the post office. The post office is always frustrating. All right, I'm going to have to be patient. And you can sort of psych yourself up. Okay, I'm going to be very patient in the post office, you know. And you go into the post office with the attitude that you're going to be very patient and not going to let it stress you out. And off you go to the post office. And that's a good thing to do. That's a good thing to do. Psych yourself up. If you know it's going to be a frustrating situation, then prepare for it. You know, you're going to City Hall or somewhere like that, and you know it's going to be a lot of hassle. Okay, I'm going to have to be patient here, because if I get grumpy, it's going to make the situation worse, you know, and you can sort of psych up for it. However, it's the unexpected. So, the morning after the fire, pretty early in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, I'd only had about 4 hours sleep, and I was tired and grumpy and a bit over it. And I wanted to get out of the house and get away from the stress for a little while. So, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll take the camera and I'll go down to the scene of that fire, and I'll get some video for the end of the video. I wanted to show you guys at the end of the fire video, I wanted to show you what the damage was, because when the fire was actually on, we couldn't get close enough and it was too smoky and all that sort of thing. So I thought, okay, by now it'll have settled down, they'll have a police guard on it, and I can just go down and just videotape it. So went for a walk to where the fire was, and got down there, and as expected, there was police tape, as there was the day before, and there was a police car parked there. Now, we've seen this before. They'll do that. They'll have police sitting on fire scenes like that, and probably until they're investigated and everything else. Standard procedure, isn't it? So not surprised by it at all. Walked up, and just wanted a couple of minutes. Went around the back of the building first, got a minute of the back of the building, and then went around the front of the building where the police car was, and just walked up, nodded to the policeman, walked past the policeman and nodded to him, and then just walked up to the back of the police car, behind the police car, and started to video the front of the shop. And the policeman got out of the car and come over and said, "Why are you taking a video?" Right now, right, at this point, we have always advised that in situations like this, you don't argue, you just say, okay. And as it was usually what we do in situations like that, we've already taken the video that we need, and in that case I'd already taken the video that we needed. I only needed about 20 seconds, got that, and so I could have just said to him, oh, I'm sorry, you don't want me taking videos? Okay, and sorry about that, and walked away, which is what I should have done, right? It's what I should have done, but just in the wrong frame of mind. And again, it's not an excuse, it's just explaining this is how you can mess up. This is how you can mess up in Japan. If you're in the wrong frame of mind, 4 hours sleep, not feeling real switched on, not feeling really together, feeling a bit irritable, to be honest. And just the way he sort of said it, he was being very polite, as if we've shown you lots of encounters with police on our Crime Emergency Services playlist, lots of encounters with police, and all of them have been pleasant, all of them have been polite, and this guy too, very pleasant, very polite policeman. But it's just his questioning. He got out of the car and said, why are you taking a video? And I said, because, and I was a bit sort of fazed by the question, because, the day before, the news helicopters had been there and they'd been filming, and we had actually seen a couple of people holding up their smartphones and getting video of the fire, and it just didn't seem like an odd thing to do. I was outside the police tape, and if a shop in your local area has been burnt down, it's not terribly unusual to take a picture or a video, is it? I mean, if the owner had been there in the front of the shop crying on his, with his family, and they'd been crying and it had been a big emotional scene, I might not have done it, Well, I wouldn't have done it. But it was just the policeman sitting in his car and there was no one around, just the burnt out shop. You can see for yourself on the video. So it's just sort of I was a bit fazed by it. So, he said, "Why are you taking a video?" I said, "Well, it's interesting. I haven't, the place is burnt down. I'm sort of interested in it." And actually I used the wrong word. I said omoshiroi, which in Japanese means interesting, but it also means funny. And he said, "Why is it funny? Why is it interesting? Why is it interesting?" And I said, "Oh, well, no, not funny. It's just, it's obviously bad, but it's just, it's interesting. So I'm taking a video." And he said, "Oh, it's not very good." And I said to him, and all this was in Japanese, of course, right? And it's not very good. And I said, "Why? I'm standing on the street outside the tape, videoing the shop, And he said, "Yeah, but it's a bad thing, it's a bad thing." And I said, but why? The news helicopter was here yesterday and there was people down the street with their smartphones. Why is it not okay today? "Oh, because it's a bad thing that's happened here." He said something that means sort of like tragedy. It's a tragedy. And I said, "Oh yeah, for sure." And he said, "If it was your house that burnt down." And I said, "Well, yeah." And it just wasn't. Should have just walked away, right? Right at the very start, should have just walked away. Now, the conversation went on for a while. He was being polite. He was being polite. I was being polite, but there was this discussion, and we weren't understanding each other. I wasn't getting where he was coming from, and he wasn't getting where I was coming from. And I was trying to explain my point of view. Now, this sort of stuff is a waste of time when you do this, because it's often a cultural difference and just a perspective on the thing difference, and it's a waste of time discussing it. It really is. It really, really is. You're better off just leaving it alone and walking away, But I just kept going with it, and it was polite enough, but it was just a waste of time, And I was saying to him, but there's no one here. It's just an empty building, an empty burnt building. So it's not hurting anyone's feelings, And he's saying, "Yeah, but it's a bad thing that happened, so you shouldn't be taking a video of it," right? And then just to complicate it, just in the middle of the frustration, an old man came past And the old man came past and said, something Gaijin, right? Meaning foreigner. Something foreigner. And I said to him, what? As he sort of said it as he was walking past. And I said, what foreigner? And he said, foreigners are no good. Gaijin wa dame, he said, as he walked away. Now, I've had people look at me while I've lived in Japan. I've had people look at me sometimes with a face that says that. You know, they look at you with a face that sort of says, I don't like foreigners. But I've never heard anyone actually say it in my presence, you know, that foreigners are no good. And it's hard to tell from what he said whether he meant just me or all foreigners. But I've never had, in the whole time I've been in Japan, I've never ever had anyone say that. Anything even similar to that. I've had people give me funny looks that weren't real friendly, but I've never had anyone actually say anything like that before. And I suspect that the only reason he had the courage to say it was because there was a policeman standing there talking to me. Because I'd imagine if he just walked past me in the street and I'd said good morning, he would have said good morning, and that would have been the end of it. I seriously doubt whether he would have said that to me if we'd been on our own, you know. But you can just imagine, in the middle of this frustrating conversation with the policeman, this old guy walks past and says, foreigners are no good. So you can imagine what that did to the atmosphere, right? And to my stress level and frustration and everything else, you know. I was just totally fazed, absolutely fazed by that one. Didn't see that coming, never heard that before, you know. Just totally spun out on all levels. So the old man just kept walking, that was it. A positive thing was that I didn't pursue it. You know, he said something foreigner. I said, what was that about a foreigner? He said, foreigners are no good. And then he just kept walking, and I left it alone. I didn't say any more. I was too fazed, actually, but that was the right thing to do, not to pursue that any further, just leave that alone, not say anything else to him, and he walked away. So of the morning's bad mistakes that I made that morning, that wasn't one of them. That was okay, because he just walked away. Now, I don't know why he said that. I did have the camera in my hand. I wasn't filming when he walked past. I don't know how much of the conversation with the policeman he'd heard, whether that's what triggered it, or whether he just doesn't like foreigners at all, or what it was. It could well have been standing there in front of the scene with a camera in my hand. That might have been it. Or he might have heard what the policeman said, or he might have heard my tone talking to the policeman or something that might have triggered that response, or he just might not like foreigners at all. Who knows? But there is a percentage of people who just don't like foreigners, right? We just have to accept that, don't we? So, but my behaviour doesn't help with that, right? The fact that I'm standing there debating with a policeman whether or not I should be able to take a video, and because I'd actually said to him, so the fact that I was doing that obviously doesn't do much for foreigners' image, because most Japanese people would have said, oh, very, very sorry, and left it at that and walked away. You know, they wouldn't have stood there and debated it with the cop. Most Japanese, I know some Japanese people who would, but most wouldn't. Most would just go, oh, okay, and they'd walk away. So what I was doing was the wrong thing to be doing, for sure. So eventually what happened, it just got to a point where we weren't going anywhere with it, and I just said to him, all right, okay. And I did say to him at one stage, look, I know the law about filming, and I'm standing on a public road filming this building, and there's no law against that, is there? And he said no. It's not against the law, it's just not a good thing to do, is what he said. And so, okay, all right. So I just walked away. So I went off, and then later in the day, I was having lunch with my Japanese relatives, right? And I told them, I said, this is what happened this morning, what do you think? And there was a bit of tilting of heads going on and sucking through teeth, right? Which usually means something's not cool. And, oh, yeah. And then I was saying, oh, well, it's really bad, because that place, is a bad thing that happened there. And so again, I sort of put my point of view forward a little bit and said, look, in another country, in most countries, I think, if that happened, if a place burnt down like that and the owner was standing out the front with his family and they were crying, if you pulled out a camera and filmed them crying, or even filmed the scene with them standing there crying, it would be a terrible thing to do, wouldn't it? So I can understand. I think you guys can understand that point of view, can't you? That it's their tragedy that's happened, you know. And we all see stuff like that on the internet, don't we? Where someone's suffering a tragedy, there's been a car accident or something, and someone's injured, and people are standing around with their smartphones. And I think most of us find that sort of, you know, not a cool thing to do. You know, videoing someone else's suffering. But I think some of you guys would agree, or some of you guys would feel the same way, that there's a difference between filming someone suffering, a person suffering, and filming an empty building that's been damaged by fire, right? Because we see images of burnt buildings damaged by fire on TV all the time, don't we? You know, just the building itself, the damage caused by the fire. You know, recently in Australia there was huge bushfires, and you know, thousands of homes were burnt to the ground, and we saw all those images, and we saw people crying, incidentally. But I won't go down that track. We're just talking about filming the empty building when the owners aren't around. You know, just walking up on the street and filming a burnt out building, which is all that was done. So, but yeah, the family's sort of going, oh no, not cool, you know, because it's their suffering and so on. And I said, but the news helicopters did it, and other people did it with smartphones, yeah, but not cool. So the general consensus amongst the Japanese rallies was that it's not a cool thing to do. So the lessons learned, and these are the reasons for this video. The lessons learned, what we think is okay and what other people think is okay in Japan is not necessarily the same thing. And this stuff really leaves you feeling bad. I've got to tell you, that was a week ago or so, and I felt bad for a couple of days after, because when you try really hard, now any foreigner who lives in Japan and tries their best to do the right thing will relate to this, because it doesn't matter how hard you try to do the right thing and how hard you try to be a good person and a good citizen and a you know, not upset anybody and do the right thing. No matter how hard you try, now and again you're going to do something that you think's okay to do, and that it turns out it's not, and people don't like it that you've done it. And it really feels like shit. I felt like shit for a couple of days. I felt really bad because, you know, the policeman was very polite and very professional, but you could see he was frustrated that I wasn't getting this thing. And here I was debating this thing with him, which was a big mistake. And then the old guy coming past with his comment. And then having told the rallies, of course, too, that you could see they were cringing a bit as well, you know. So here's this thing that some of you guys might agree, you know, in another country might not have been a bad thing to do, but from a Japanese perspective, the majority seem to think it was a bad thing to do. So, you know, the filming of something that was a tragedy to another person. And I mean, it doesn't matter how many examples. I've had examples going through my head from the tsunami and through all the tragedies, the earthquakes and the fires and all the things that happen in Japan where you see them on TV. But it just seems that if you're standing there with a camera in your hand, it's going to make people feel bad. So they can do it on the news, they can do it in the newspaper. And if you're in a big mass of people, apparently you can do it, but if you stand there as an individual doing it, it might make people feel bad. So we just have to accept that. And I think there's a lot of stuff in Japan like this where we think it's okay, you know, and it's like, well, hang on, outside Japan, that's not a bad thing to do. But the point is we're inside Japan, right? And if your goal is to try not to upset people and try and do the right thing here, and I mean, we live in a pretty small community in a small town, and the last thing you want to do is upset anybody or get on the wrong side of people, you know, because that policeman and that old man are probably going to be at the next festival that we go to, you know. So you don't want that bad vibe happening, and you don't want people looking at you like, oh, there's that foreigner, you know, that you know, isn't a good person or whatever they might be thinking. So, you know, that's the first lesson is we have to accept, without argument, we have to accept that if we're told that something's not cool, we just have to accept it and just go with it, you know. And I mean, we don't have to, you know, you can stand there and argue if you want to, but you know, from experience, I know it just doesn't work, it doesn't change anything. You know, nobody suddenly says, oh, you have a good point. Okay, well, maybe it is okay. That never happens, right? If it's something that's not considered cool in Japan, it's not considered cool in Japan. And that's not going to change no matter how much you debate it. So debating it's a waste of time. So there's a lesson there. You know, if you're told that's not cool, we don't do that, or it's best not to do that. You just have to, even if you think, well, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with this. You just have to go, oh, okay, and just move along, which is what I normally do, incidentally. But now and again, and here's the other lesson is look out when you're tired, or when you're grumpy, or when you're hungry, or at any point where you're weak, when you're not at your best. That's where you've really got to watch out, because I've been caught out with this. I've talked about this on other videos about how careful you've got to be about this. It's so easy when you're tired, and because living in Japan can be very tiring in itself, you know, because it's so complicated, and it can be quite tiring in itself. So you're quite often tired, and or hungry, and you know, not at your best, and that's when you're really vulnerable to these sorts of things. That's when it's harder to be really cool and just go, all right, okay, that's fine, no problem, sorry, and walk away, you know, which is what Japanese people do. Not every Japanese person, we know some people that are a bit argumentative, but the majority of Japanese people, if a particular policeman, but pretty well anybody, an older man or a guardsman or anybody tells them that something's not good, or, you know, NG, they say, no good, or please don't do that. Most Japanese people just go, oh, sumimasen, and just walk away, which is what I should have done. And I already had my video. That's the other silly thing about that. I'd already taken the video, already had it. And after I talked with him, I didn't take any more. I just said to him, all right, well, shogunai, you know, can't be helped. It is what it is, and walked away, you know. But the whole discussion with him didn't achieve anything. It just created a bad vibe for him and for me, and the chances of running into him again in our town is probably pretty high, you know. And he's going, oh, that guy, because that's the other thing with being a foreigner in Japan, you're remembered, you know. And even if you're not, even if you're just a tourist and you're just here to come here and have a visit and go home again, you still don't need that sort of bad vibe. And I always think too that you're doing damage to foreigners in general. You know, that old guy that came past probably already didn't like foreigners, and then when he sees a foreigner behaving badly, he probably thinks, oh, well, there you go, that's what you expect from foreigners, isn't it? And you do hear foreigners say that. You do hear Japanese people say that about foreigners. If, you know, a foreigner holds up robs a convenience store or does something like that, you will actually hear Japanese people say, oh, of course, you know, foreigner did it, oh, of course. You do hear that, because it's like, yeah, well, that's what you'd expect from a foreigner, isn't it, you know? And again, from other standards, from some other countries, the discussion I had with the cop was very polite. Both of us were very polite. There was no raised voices. We weren't arguing, we were sort of discussing and trying to put each other's point of view across. It wasn't an argument, there was no raised voices, there was no anger or anything from either of us. You know, he was very polite and very professional. So anyway, what are the lessons? The lessons are, if you're told something in Japan, is, you know, it's better just to accept it. It really is. You can argue it if you want to, but it's a mistake. And if you're trying to do the right thing in Japan and be a good guest, well, and even if you live here, really, you want to be a good citizen then, don't you? You want to be a good member of society. So it's better just to accept it. It really is. You can argue it if you want to, but, you know, from experience, you know, when I make those mistakes, you know, you do feel bad about it later. You know, and particularly when you find out that his perspective on it was the normal perspective here, and that mine was not the normal perspective here, then, you know, you got to accept you're wrong. It was a mistake, you know, to argue it. So there's that, and then be even more careful when you're tired or hungry or stressed out or not feeling at your best, because that's the time where you'll make the biggest mistakes, for sure, you know. So, as we say all the time with our videos, we don't stop to think about whether a thing that we're filming is a good thing or a bad thing. We just want to show you what we see. We want to show you what we see. That's all we try and do. And an udon shop, a noodle shop on fire, we don't stop to think about whether we're going to show you that. It's just it's what we're seeing. We're seeing a noodle shop on fire. So we're going to show you that, and we're going to continue to do that, but be a little bit more sensitive about, you know, the situation, and also we'll be a little bit more, you know, if anybody does say anything like that, just go, okay, all right, that's fair, and walk away, and not debate with anyone, you know. So anyway, there it was. Still waiting for our battery for our front camera. The battery for our front camera. There's 3 new ones coming from China. So they're supposed to be here by now, but obviously there's some problems going on in China at the moment, so they've been delayed. So hopefully they'll turn up soon. We'll get our front camera back. Anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.